What's up, and welcome into Fantasy Baseball today on Monday, January 16th, Martin Luther King Jr. Day. I am Frank Stanfield, joined once again by Scott White and Chris Towers. Today on the show, we have not talked about the balanced schedule yet at all and what it might mean for fantasy baseball. It might not matter at all, but I found a few things. I'm going to bring it up to these guys, and they'll let me know if it actually means anything. We also have a bunch of your mailbag questions, so continue to send those in. fantasybaseball@cbsi.com. That's the letter I if you want to email us, or you could drop a question in an Apple Podcast rating and review. Scott, if all goes well, sneak peek, we're recording this in advance. We are meeting today. We are actually meeting today in person on January 16th.
Yeah. Haven't finalized those plans yet, but hopefully that's the case.
Oh, Scott, you sound thrilled.
I am thrilled. I am.
I sent Scott a YouTube comment. Someone said we should do a show from Scott's living room and that the internet would break if that happened. So
it would. It probably would. I don't know that that's going to happen.
Actually, the next time, when you're recording next week, you should have Scott recording and you, Frank, in the background, just moving stuff in the background.
Yeah.
Recreate one of our favorite memories.
Yes. For those who don't know, there was a live podcast where there were movers just behind Scott moving a bunch of stuff around, and I wasn't around for that, but it sounds like it was hilarious. These guys are going to be here doing live streams Tuesday and Wednesday, tomorrow and Wednesday, from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern time. So who knows? If I'm in the neighborhood, maybe I'll just knock on the door and just kind of stroll on in and start moving stuff around. We'll see what happens. Let's jump right in and take a look at this balanced schedule. What does this mean exactly? For the first time in MLB history, every team will face each other at least one series this upcoming season. Opening day is on March 30th. The season ends on October 1st. The All-Star game is set for July 11th. Teams will face their division rivals far less now than in years past. 52 total games in 2023. That is down from 76 games last season. So instead of facing your division rival 19 times each, that will now be 13 times per season. As a result, interleague play will go from 20 games each to 46 total games per team. What might this mean for fantasy baseball? Well, taking a gander, the AL East and the NL East were the toughest divisions last year by run differential. So this should mean that it's a boost to the pitchers within those divisions because they won't have to face each other as much. It's not as simple as that. Again, we're kind of parsing through these things and trying to figure it out, much like the rule changes that we talked about. I don't know which players will specifically be affected by this, but Scott, that was my early takeaway, is that AL and NL East are tough divisions. If you're not pitching within those divisions as much, theoretically, you should be facing weaker teams, and that should be good for the pitchers.
Yeah. I mean, they were the toughest divisions last year. I honestly, I don't think this means a lot for the fantasy game. I mean, you're saying, okay, so instead of facing your division rival 19 times, it'll be 13 times. So that's one series at each location that's being lost. So if you want to go look at the perspective, okay, NL West teams other than the Rockies will have one less series at Coors Field. Okay, like that doesn't change the way I'm going to approach any of their players. And like in the grand scheme of a 162 game season, I don't think this is going to be noticeable for individual player performances.
Yeah, I mean, it could be something that's just around the margins, right? Maybe Garrett Cole, instead of having a 3.50 ERA, he's, back down to a 3.3 or 3.25, or that's just an example. But I don't think these things are going to be drastic changes, but it could just change things slightly around the margins. And I'm happy you brought up the NL West and missing out on an extra series in Coors Field, because this might not sound like a lot, but Manny Machado, CJ Cron, and Juan Soto each hit 3 home runs in Coors Field last season. They're still going to play their, I guess it's going to be at 6 or 7 games in Coors Field, but they're losing out on a series. Jake Cronenworth hit .405 with a 12.03 OPS in 48 plate appearances. That's actually a decent amount. Like, I don't know how much that takes off. Maybe it's like 5 to 10 points in batting average, but Jake Cronenworth was already not a great batting average contributor anyway. NL West hitters who had an OPS over 900 at Coors Field last season: Juan Soto, Jake McCarthy, Jake Cronenworth. Christian Walker, Tyro Estrada, Mike Yastrzemski, Manny Machado, and Will Smith. Chris, again, I could be reaching here. Is there anything? Do you think this matters at all for fantasy baseball? You are muted, sir.
It shouldn't change how you draft. I don't think there will be some impact. There's always some player who has a massive series at Coors Field. It happens several times a year. And, it becomes slightly less likely for the Padres, Dodgers, Diamondbacks. God, I always forget. There's one other team in the NL West, right? Who am I forgetting?
I didn't. But what you're saying though is almost like a Schrodinger's cat situation, right? Like where in this alternate reality, some player would have had a huge series at Coors Field that now he doesn't have.
Right. Like
good luck figuring out who that was.
To look in the past and say, well, maybe Jay Cronenworth would have been a little less valuable because he didn't get that extra. But who that will be, and because guys go to Coors Field and go 1 for 10 over the course of a series, that happens too. So it'll matter. It's just what the impact will be in the future is pretty much impossible to say. I don't think it should impact your draft strategy much whatsoever. It does, I think, there's some weird schedule things, like the Yankees open the season against the Giants. That's weird.
Yeah.
That it's just going to take some getting used to, from the perspective of my brain, which is used to the, but
as a baseball fan, it certainly changes the flow of the season.
But I like it. I'm a fan of every team. I think it's cool that every team's going to have an opportunity to face every other team, and your chances of seeing a given player at your team's home stadium are increased. I like that. I don't love that the Yankees are playing at Miami this year. It would have been nice to see the Marlins up here in an extra series, but I'll live with that. I guess they only get 3 series at the old Citi Field now, but I think it's great. I'm a fan. I just don't think it makes much of an impact on the fantasy outcomes.
So I'm actually going down at Scott's neck of the woods. When you're listening to this, I'm already there. But the point is, I'm going to look at condos and stuff and seeing, all right, is this something I would want to do? Do I want to make this move to Fort Lauderdale? I already looked at the Marlins schedule to see when the Yankees are in town. So
it's in mid-August. Yeah,
August. Yeah, I mean, so there's a real chance that I'll be at that game. But I don't know. We'll see what happens. I guess this probably doesn't matter to you guys either, but I'll just bring it up because it's something else that I wrote down here. The AL and NL Central teams, I think typically we've looked to target their pitchers, or just thinking about it, like Corbin Burns, hey, favorable schedule, he pitches in the NL Central, or for the AL Central teams who faced the Twins or the Guardians or the Royals for that matter. It's something that we have targeted in years past. So I'm guessing overall this might not matter much, but maybe it's a slight downgrade.
It certainly matters more on a divisional scale than individual team. I think that there's likely to be more of an impact on the AL and NL Central teams who generally face weaker schedules, at least in the recent past, than there is for the NL West teams who lose that 1 series at Coors Field, just because it's 1 series versus 15% of the schedule or whatever it works out to be. So I do think there's some impact there, but again, it shouldn't be enough to change. This isn't like the COVID season, right, where they only faced NL and AL only Central team, or AL and NL Central teams, and there was a huge impact. We saw pitchers in those divisions got a real boost. It's not nearly as dramatic as that. We're talking about losing 15% of your games or whatever it is versus your own division, and adding teams from every division. So I think if anything, it balances the schedule and makes it less likely that the division that you play in is going to have an impact on a player's outcome.
Never forget Kenta Maeda 2020. Great schedule. Oh, Zach Plesac. How could we forget Zach?
I mean, Trevor Bauer had a 1.90 ERA that year. He won the Cy Young almost. I'm not going to say entirely because of it, but that was a legitimate thing with the NL and AL Central. I think Zach Plesac had 8 starts and 4 of them were against the Royals or something weird like that.
I don't want to pick on the AL Central, but the Cleveland Guardians won the AL Central in 2022 with a run differential of plus 64, which by my estimation right now is by far the lowest of any division winner in baseball last season. So again, just to put that in perspective. All right, so balanced schedule, that's what you need to know about it. I think it's more so from a baseball perspective than from a fantasy baseball perspective, but just a few things that I noticed and pointed out there for you. Let's get into some listener questions. Again, you could always email us at fantasybaseball@cbsi.com, or you could leave a question in an Apple Podcast rating and review. This one is from Vince. An opponent in my league, Dynasty, 12 teams, head-to-head points, is offering me Justin Verlander for Spencer Strider. Spencer Strider will cost me $20 this year. We have a $1,000 auction budget for the draft and in-season pickups. Verlander will cost $40 this year. Keepers move up in $20 tiers year over year. I think Verlander is the more valuable pitcher right now. Also, full disclosure, I'm a diehard Mets fan. However, I would hate to miss out on 4 to 5 years worth of Strider being an ace for a cheaper price.
Yeah. Even if they were the same price, because it's a dynasty league, I think you stick with Strider over Verlander. Interestingly enough, I have dynasty rankings, top 150 on the site. So you might want to check those out as you're weighing these decisions. It's presuming equal cost for everybody, which isn't the case here. But Spencer Strider is 33rd in those rankings, and Justin Verlander is 70th, 7-0.
In this instance, when you're talking about like 4% of your budget versus 2% of your budget, yes, acknowledging that you need money for in-season pickups, like I would say that's fairly even value. Like Verlander costs twice as much, but it's such a small number that, I think it's the cost shouldn't make that big of a difference there. But I think it still makes Strider the better option.
And for what it's worth, look, Strider's much, much younger than Verlander. On a per inning basis, Spencer Strider was the second best pitcher in baseball behind Jacob deGrom last year. So he should be really good. He probably won't throw as many innings as someone like Verlander, but Spencer Strider should be awesome when he's on the mound.
There's a lot more risk that you get relatively nothing out of Strider than Verlander. Like Verlander is a proven ace who, outside of the Tommy John surgery, has been a guy who gives you 200 innings pretty much every single season. Spencer Strider hasn't topped 100 innings once in his life. So, I think there's real risk that Strider's still in the age and experience range where, like, if he needed Tommy John surgery, I'm not saying I hope it happens. I hope it doesn't. But, like, generally speaking, 24-year-olds who throw 98 miles an hour, there's a lot of injury risk with those types of guys who haven't proven it.
Putting Vince's question aside, because we haven't had you on the podcast much in the past few months, Chris, our rankings are all about to come out basically right around the time the podcast is airing. Where do you have Justin Verlander ranked, Chris, among starting pitchers?
Let me see.
Because you're talking about how safe he is, and I agree. But I seem to be on an island in terms of ranking him number one at starting.
Yeah, he's number 4 for me.
Okay, so still really high.
Actually number 3, I guess, because I haven't Shohei Ohtani, when I uploaded it, he moves up because of his overall ranking, but not at starting pitcher.
Yeah,
so
not gonna, if you're drafting
it's number
just
3. Strider is number 13 right now, although that's one that's certainly subject to debate, and I could see moving, probably not up. I think that there's a chance I might move him down, but I do have Verlander quite a bit higher.
I'm pleased to hear it, because the consensus seems to have Justin Verlander outside the top 10, and we've had some people on who had him barely inside the top 20, and look, I'm probably not drafting the number 1 pitcher no matter who it is, but
I mean, I guess the case would be that he didn't throw that many innings last season, that his strikeout rate was relatively low relative to, like, only 185 strikeouts, 9.5 K per 9. A lot of, inflated ERA there. So I could see the case against him, but I don't know. I don't think there's too much to be concerned about there. It's just maybe there's less upside with him than there is someone like Garrett Cole or certainly Corbin Burns.
I think it's just ageism, personally.
It could be. I mean, I think there was a slight decline in the skills that we've seen in years past. The swinging strike rate was lower. The K- walk rate is not where it has been, in prime Justin Verlander years. But he just won the AL Cy Young, and he had a sub-2 ERA. So
led the majors in ERA, led the majors in WHIP, and like the stuff itself it's not like he lost 3 miles per hour on his fastball or anything, or even 1 mile per hour on his fastball. So I think he's fine.
I have Verlander at 6, so I'm a little bit lower than you guys, but I think still higher than consensus. I have Strider exactly at 13 too, so high five, Chris. We have the same ranking there. Let's move over to
MVS.
That's a FFT live stream for those who listen or watch both of these contents here. From Mario, 12-team auction, $260 budget, points league with middle infielders and corner infielders. Keep 6 of these players. Corey Seager for $20. Shane O'Mac. I'll get back to Shane O'Mac. Carlos Rodon, $10. Wander Franco for $9. Stephen Kwan for $8. Zach Gallen, $7. O'Neal Cruz, $5. Spencer Strider for $1. Nate Lowe for $1. More context, I also have 3 minor leaguers that are free to keep until active or lose rookie eligibility. Matt Mervis, parentheses, thank you, Scott White, Tristan Casas, and Josh Young.
Okay. Okay, let's see. So this is a points league. That's important context. I think Strider at $1 is a slam dunk.
Yep.
So I don't want to go pitching crazy this year, but like just glancing through cost benefit,
they're all really good values.
I think McClanahan, Rodon,
yep,
at $11 and $10 respectively are pretty easy calls. Gallen
at 7, yeah.
So how many are we up to?
That's
so that brings you to $29 on 4 pitchers, which, like, the thing about that is you could just not draft another pitcher or, not invest much in pitcher otherwise, and you should be pretty good, right? Like, you've got 2-3 guys who are projected as borderline SP1s between Rodon, McClanahan and Rodon, or Rodon, Strider, and McClanahan, and then Gallen is an SP3. So like that's a pretty great pitching staff already. So, I think there are volume concerns in a points league with all 3 of those guys, but not enough that I wouldn't keep them.
Because it's a points league, I prefer Wander Franco for 9 instead of O'Neal Cruz for 5.
Mm-hmm.
And you could keep both since there's a middle infield spot, but I think I also prefer Corey Seager for 20 rather than O'Neal Cruz for 5 since it's a points league. But that I could be talked out of that one.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
I think either way, you're going with a Texas Ranger for that 6th spot. I like Nate Lowe for $1 or $2. He's probably going to go for, I don't know, $10 to $12 in a 12-team auction like that. So you get some savings there. I agree. The 4 pitchers, Wander Franco, I would go Nate Lowe. Sounds like these two like Corey Seager. From Jason, in a 10-team, 3 outfielder head-to-head categories league with OBP. Dynasty league with 5 keepers, no contract, so you can keep for life. Juan Soto, Mike Trout, Manny Machado are locked in. Need to decide on 2 of the 4 below. Corbin Burns, Spencer Strider, Michael Harris, and Corbin Carroll. Should I go with pitchers to give me an advantage in strikeouts, or should I keep the young bats because of the keep for life factor and their power/speed upside? Are the pitchers easier to replace?
You keep Michael Harris and Corbin Burns.
Yeah, I think that's the way I'd go.
Even with OBP, with Michael Harris?
Yeah, I mean, that is a wrinkle that does hurt Michael Harris in a way it doesn't in traditional 5x5. To be
fair, you already have
Soto and Mike Trout are arguably 2 of the best OBP guys out there. So you're probably okay. Like, you're going to have to sacrifice somewhere. And, it comes down to, I think, Strider versus Harris. And I have concerns about, whether what Harris did last season was for real and whether there's, the long-term viability of it. But I also have those same concerns about Strider, who is also a young pitcher. So I just think, all else being equal, and I think Harris versus Strider is pretty close to being equal, if not, tilted towards Strider in the short term, or it's still tilted toward Harris. I think you just take the young position player.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And then you have Corbin Burns as your ace. And, once the draft actually starts up, you have 4 hitters locked in. Your outfield is good to go. So you don't have to worry about that, which, frankly, it's a pretty rough position this year.
Outfield and third base locked in with Manny Machado there. So that's real nice.
Yeah, that's true. And then, once this draft starts up, you can pick up your SP2, 3, whatever. And I think you're good to go. So I agree with these guys. I would go with Corbin Burns and Michael Harris. Just a reminder that I'll be out for the next 2 days. You'll get an early rankings debate and a Roto mock draft recap from Scott, Chris Towers, and Chris Welsh over the next 2 days. And our 2023 rankings and salary cap values will be live on the site tomorrow. When you're listening to this, January 17th, go to cbssports.com/fantasy/baseball/rankings. Roto, head-to-head points, AL only, NL only, you name it. It will be live on the site Tuesday, January 17th. Let's take a break, and we'll be back right after this.
I am offering you a chance to help bring down the single greatest threat to New Orleans.
I can't do this. There are memories that I just can't bear.
Have I given you the impression that any of this is optional?
What are you not telling me?
Stay away from my family.
Get him. That's not how this is gonna play out.
Let's jump back into your mailbag questions. This one is from Ty. I play in a 5x5 head-to-head 12-team league. We are allowed to keep 6 players and have a budget of $260. I have a few options and was curious to get your thoughts on the last few keepers. Prices increase by $3 each year. You can keep a player as long as you want. My initial thought would be to keep Schwarber, Brandon Woodruff, and Shane McClanahan. However, with the higher price tag of those players, I could go cheaper and hold on to a Josh Young or Tristan McKenzie type. So definitely keeping Pete Alonso for 19, Bobby Witt Jr. for 13, Sandy Alcantara for 23. The other options, Schwarber for 21, Josh Young for $5, Brandon Woodruff for 23, Shane McClanahan for 24, Nick Lodolo for 7, and Tristan McKenzie for 15.
Yeah, I don't think the discount there between like a McKenzie at 15 and a McClanahan at 24 is enough to justify keeping the cheaper player. I think you have the right idea. The discount is enough for the 3 studlier players, Schwarber, Woodruff, and McClanahan, that even though you'll probably go into the draft with less available dollars than some other teams, the quality of the players makes it worth it.
Now, I'm thinking about it from a 12-team head-to-head categories perspective. These are probably close to the prices that these players are going to go for. Kyle Schwarber, at least, I mean, he could be a little bit more expensive at $21. Woodruff at 23, Shane McClanahan. Maybe McClanahan's closer to like a $30 pitcher. But Nick Lodolo at 7. Lodolo at 7 kind of stands out too. I know he's a popular.
Lodolo at 7 seems like about what he'll actually go for. I mean,
I think he's probably more of like a 10 to 15 guy, but maybe I'm wrong about that.
What is he out? He's outside the top 40 starting pitchers for me. So you guys have actually put together your values and I haven't, but just from past experience with them. And of course, your distribution of dollars may vary.
Well, that's always the case in any keeper or dynasty league, because Pete Alonso's not going to go for 19. Bobby Witt's not going to go for 13. Sandy, like those are all probably $30 players.
Sure.
And you've got them for 55 total or whatever.
So extra dollars are out there.
Yeah, there's always inflation.
Keeping their discounted players. Yeah.
Right.
There's always inflation in a dynasty or keeper league draft, and so that's the thing you have to keep in mind, is that whether it's a snake draft, whether it's a salary cap draft, you're always going to have, because there's fewer dollars going into the draft allocated to the very, very good players. Typically, that's usually who's going to be kept. You're going to see the middle class go higher. I have Lodolo for. He's like a $10 player for me right now. So I think like $7 is a fine value, but it's not a steal by any means, especially given the likely inflation. I think he'll go for around 10. So I don't think that's a huge discount either way. I think in this scenario, you just take the best players. You've got the flexibility to do that, because you've got, again, Alonso, Witt, and Alcantara for $55 total. It brings you to keeping Schwarber, Woodruff, and McClanahan. That brings you to like 126 or 127 total. And that's probably $160 worth of players. So you still come out ahead.
and a little bit of auction draft strategy as well. I typically like to live in this area, sub 30% dollar players. I don't typically like to spend up unless, that's what the draft room is telling me. If everyone's, doesn't want to spend up, then you're probably getting those guys for values as well. I like to live in this range, and I do stand corrected because I have Nick Lodolo as a $9 pitcher. So good job on you, Scotty. Steamer has Nick Lodolo as an $11 pitcher. So he's right around that range. And I actually have Woodruff as a $29 pitcher. So that's coming at a pretty good value for you this upcoming season.
Do you know if Steamer's for 12 team, calibrated for a 12 team or a 15 team?
So you can set it up either way. If you go to fangraphs.com, they have an auction calculator, and you can set it up for 12 or 15s. The numbers that I'm looking at right now are for 12-team leagues. So
interesting. Okay.
Has Lodolo as an $11 player, and they have Woodruff as actually a $17 player. So
I think we being people who write for CBS tend to put a what's the word I'm looking for? We prioritize the high end guys. We're less cautious. So our highest players we tend to give a higher value to than maybe more of a projection system would.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the projection system, they've got, like, Steamer has Aaron Judge as a $37 player. Yeah. He's not going to go for 37 in any $260. Like, that's just not typically how it works. The best players are going to go at least 40, usually more like 50.
Yeah, and I have Aaron Judge at $40 in a mixed roto league as well, in a 12-team league. And again, if you really want him, he's probably going to push something like 45. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, that's where I have the top players. I have the top 5 in the 44 range.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to our next question. This one's from Colin. Struggling with which keepers I should keep in my minor league keeper spots. Pick 3 of these.
Ooh, prospects.
Yeah. Which
top 100 prospects is out, baby.
If you listened last week, we did an extensive breakdown. We jumped all around Scott's top 100 prospects, and that article is live on the site. So make sure to check it out as well. Pick 3 of these names: Dre Jameson, Miguel Vargas, Jordan Walker, Matt Mervis, Ezekiel Tovar, and Ricky Tiedemann. Also, I currently have Gunnar Henderson. I have Riley Green in a keeper spot and Gunnar in a minor league spot, but have considered keeping Gunnar in the major league spot if you think one of those guys should be kept over Riley Green. So I guess we should throw him in that conversation as well, Scott. So I'm going to add him to the list here and choose 3 of those, including Riley Green.
Okay, so Jordan Walker's my number 3 prospect. Miguel Vargas is my number 9 prospect. And I believe my 3rd highest on this list is Ezekiel Tovar, which is 18. So do I want to keep Riley Green, who I had as a top 5 prospect last year, over Ezekiel Tovar, who I have number 18 this year? They have changed the dimensions in Comerica Park, long overdue, in a way that should benefit hitters, though it's not a drastic change. It can help. Riley Green was pretty disappointing, obviously, as a rookie. That's the only reason it's in doubt. I think I would promote, or I think I would keep Riley Green over Tovar. But it is a close call, and if you guys disagree, I'd love to hear your arguments.
Scott, do you have your list open right in front of you right now?
Top 100, yeah.
Where do you have Ricky Tiedemann on that list?
26.
And Tovar is 18. So it's pretty close.
Yeah, I mean, and that's close enough that, like, if you just really love Tiedemann, you really want a pitcher, you don't have a lot of faith in Tovar, you think maybe he's being inflated because of where he's going to play his home games, Colorado, obviously, for those who don't know, then okay. Like, it's close enough that I think personal preference is a fine reason to go Tiedemann instead of Tovar. And like, I wouldn't even object that much if you wanted to go Matt Mervis, who I have outside the top 40. And like, that's kind of, I'm Matt Mervis 41st. So we're talking about 18 for Tovar, 41st for Matt Mervis. I mean, it seems like a big gap, but given the hundreds of prospects out there, like 23 spots, you know, like I wouldn't consider Jordan Walker number 3 and Matt Mervis on more or less equal footing, but I think Tovar and Mervis are closer than those 23 spots might suggest.
I would
think
just go with Riley Green.
All right. Yeah. So a couple different answers there. And Riley Green, some underlying good data for him. His max exit velocity was very good last year. He hit the ball hard. He hit the ball on the ground way too much. And that wasn't really an issue for him in the minors. So I think if he can get that launch angle up, the changes in dimensions to Comerica Park, there is an argument for Riley Green as well. But sounds like Scott's going Tovar. I'm actually going to go Ricky Tiedemann, who was, by some people, the breakout minor league pitcher last season. And there's a lot of hype around him. So I would go with him. But if you want a position player, I think you could choose any of those other ones.
We didn't get a chance to talk about it because there were so many prospects to talk about, but we did talk about Andrew Painter. Andrew Painter, Marlins prospect Yuri Perez, and Ricky Tiedemann were 3 pitchers who made it to Double-A as 19-year-olds last year, which is not something you see very often. They're all very tall. They all throw a ton of strikes despite being tall, and it's easy to get excited about Tiedemann. I think, he threw only 78 and 2/3 innings, so you got to worry with all pitching prospects. Like, is he going to be able to hold up physically?
Right.
But his size, I think, makes it more likely that he will.
All right, let's move on to our next question from Alex. I am a longtime FBT listener, but am rarely able to listen to the entirety of every episode, so I apologize if this is something that you typically cover at some point during the season. Your discussion of advanced metrics is one of the most useful parts of the show, but sometimes it is difficult to contextualize some of the less common statistics without benchmarks or statistical ranges for what makes a player fringe, useful, elite, etc. Would it be possible to include a segment in one of the preseason shows discussing approximate benchmarks for advanced metrics that you find particularly useful in evaluating players? He mentioned OPS, which is kind of an archaic stat, I guess, at this point. I still like using OPS. I mean, other people will use WOBA or weighted runs created plus as like an all-encompassing offensive statistic. I still like OPS. I think it's
OPS still gets you most of the way there. Right, like you sort the OPS rankings versus the WOBA rankings, they're gonna be more or less the same. Like OPS overweights slugging percentage relative to on base percentage, but even that is, generally speaking, the best players are going to be the best players.
It's language everybody understands,
yes,
and it's close enough. That's
always the thing for me is that This is when I was an editor, I would always tell writers, like, communicate with your audience in a language that they understand, and OPS is generally more understood than WOBA, although the more you use WOBA, the more. And WOBA is calculated so that it, like, tends to be the average WOBA is very close to the average on-base percentage. That's typically how it's calculated, or I don't know what the right word there would be, but yeah, that's. So if you know what a good on-base percentage is, you generally know what a good WOBA is.
Yeah, and WOBA and weighted runs created plus, they are both weighted averages. So I think they take ballpark and environment into account, right?
I think WRC plus does. I don't think WOBA does.
Okay, so again, these are just like all-encompassing statistics. They take it one step further. I like to use OPS still because, again, I think most listeners are familiar with that. Don't want to alienate people too much. I know we throw out a bunch of stats all the time, but usually I think it's useful and it's necessary for making a point about a certain player. If you're talking about, I wanted to mention the league averages for those, by the way. OPS is 706. I think typically if you're like an 800 OPS bat or better, like you're a pretty good hitter. And then, once you get 850 plus, approaching 900, that's an elite level hitter. So just something to keep in mind. And the more we talk about it, I think the more you'll just kind of pick up context clues and like, all right, you could figure out which hitters are the best and what their OPSs are once we're talking about it. League average WOBA is 310, and league average weighted runs created plus is 100 on the dot. If you're talking about StatCast data, which, again, we cite StatCast data a lot, and I think we do a good job of mentioning percentiles. So if we say, hey, this guy is a 93 mile per hour average exit velocity, we'll also tell you that's 90th percentile. So that could tell you just very obviously how good that ranking is. But league average for these statistics that we cite often, average exit velocity 88.6 miles per hour, league average. 7.5% barrel rate, that's how often a hitter is barreling a batted ball. And then hard hit rate is 38.2%. Again, those are league average. If you get up over double digit barrel rate, I think that's when we kind of start to take you seriously as a power hitter. And then hard hit rate, anything 45 to 50% or better you're generally in a pretty good range there.
And barrels are, it's hard to define easily, but it basically just, it's like a good line drive or like a very well struck ball. It's a ball that tends to have a very high range of outcomes, I think is the best way to describe it.
Yeah, it meets certain thresholds. So it'll be I think it's between 15 and 25 degree launch angle.
But depending on the exit velocity, the launch angle can widen. So it's,
those are the most optimal hit baseballs. So you want your hitters barreling up the ball as often as they possibly could. For pitching, we cite a bunch of different things, but I know some places have moved to strikeout percentage over K per nine, and I get it. There's a legitimate argument for that. I think we still kind of talk about both of them, but 8.5 K per nine was league average in 2022. ERA was 3.97. It was the same for FIP and XFIP. And again, those are ERA estimators. It takes into account different factors, things that aren't in the control of a pitcher. So it basically tells you what an ERA should be based on what a pitcher can control, FIP and XFIP. 11.2% swinging strike rate, that was league average. And then K minus walk rate, 14.3%. So as you approach 20% K minus walk, that's a really good mark. Anything, 12%, 13% or better on swinging strike rate. I think that's something we typically like to see in our pitchers as well, Scott.
Yeah, it is. And if I could go on a little tangent here, you and I, Frank, were talking after a podcast recently, we were talking about how in recent years I've made XFIP my ERA estimator of choice, and that's the one I've cited most often. But that was during the time of the juice ball era, where all fly balls hit were dangerous, and that's kind of what XFIP does. Is it treats, this is a rough way of putting it, but it treats every fly ball like a home run. So I thought it made sense to do it that way during the era where that was kind of true. I'm thinking xERA during the era we're entering in now. I'm feeling like that's the one that I'm most comfortable with. So you may hear me citing that one more often. That is the StatCast ERA estimator that is more gauging the damage
Quality
that every batted ball would do.
Yep.
And factoring in strikeout and stuff too, but it's not the traditional, these things are out of a pitcher's control, so that's what we're going to value more. It's not that kind of metric. So I'm not totally sold on that, but I guess I'm just saying I'm probably going to be citing XFIP less.
Well, and just to paint the picture a little more, so FIP, it takes the amount of home runs that a pitcher gave up. The FIP is basically just strikeouts, walks, home runs allowed. XFIP assumes all pitchers allow the same number of fly balls to become home runs, which we know isn't true based on park factors and skill set. And then xERA takes into account quality of contact on a more granular level. So it basically does strikeouts and walks, and then StatCast's various expected batting average and those stats. And so, they're all trying to identify what a pitcher's skill level is, and they're all more predictive for the following year than ERA on its own will be. And there's also Sierra, and there's also Baseball Prospectus's DRA, and which is deserved run average, and then there's all kinds of other things. And I find it all very interesting because they're all iterations on FIP in a lot of ways. FIP was kind of the first one back in like the early 2000s that really challenged the way we think about pitching and kind of took the like strikeouts, walks, and home runs are the only thing a pitcher can control. And then we know that pitchers they do have some control over quality of contact, less so than batters, but there are some pitchers who consistently outperform all of these stats, and there are some pitchers that consistently underperform all of these stats. And so it's just to say that they're all different tools to try to help predict how many runs a pitcher is going to give up. They all have their merits. I think it's interesting that like we have all these iterations, and every year we're trying to come up with new things and vertical approach angle and tunneling and all these different things. And like I find it fascinating that they all seem to just like represent like marginal increases over like the predictive value of FIP, which is like the most crude possible version of all this. I think that's very interesting. Like, it is still really interesting how much a pitcher's results are out of their control, and two, how much just strikeouts, walks, and home runs does get you like 90% of the way there relative to quote unquote better stats.
And
I wish there was a way to just instantly, like, here's the average of all of them.
So something I've done this offseason that I haven't done in years past is I've created these like massive spreadsheets for pitchers that have all of their FIP, XFIP, Sierra, K- walk rate, swinging strike rate, all on one page, just so it's so much easier to compare and contrast certain pitchers and see like, all right, who excels where. And so I guess that's the closest thing that you can get to it, Scott, where you're just looking at each one individually. I guess I could like easily average it up.
You can make a column, but
Right,
that would be that's fine going into a new season, but when you're taking stock of it in season, a little more difficult.
The last one I'll throw out there for pitchers too is CSW percentage. That is called strikes plus whiff percentage, which Alex Fast a couple of years ago did a great job researching this, and apparently it's more predictive than even swinging strike rate. So that's something else that's becoming more popular in the fantasy baseball space. And you can find most, if not all of these things on Fangraphs or baseballsavant.com. So if you want to dive in and look yourself, those are some of the things that we're constantly looking at. This next one's from Darren. Love the podcast, longtime listener. Have a salary cap / auction draft question for head-to-head categories with $270 budget. How do you guys feel in terms of having more financial flexibility come draft time? We are allowed up to 10 keepers from the previous season, and right now my keepers are projected to take up $209 of my $270 budget. Not sure if that is the right move, but I would already be locking up 1 to 2 or potentially 3-ish first, second round players in Jose Ramirez, Yordan Alvarez, and Fernando Tatis Jr. Salaries for top players have been consistently escalating the past few years, with a lot of projected first-round bats and pitchers going for $50+ in our draft. For example, Mookie Betts, $57, Garrett Cole, $55, Mike Trout, $55. These are all above projected industry auction prices, kind of where the league is right now.
Yeah, and that is what happens, as we were talking about, as discounts are kept, then there's more money available to go to other players, which causes their price to go up. And it stands to reason. Does he say how big he doesn't say how big the league is, but it stands to reason that more of those extra dollars would go to the most hotly contested players. So that makes sense. 209 to keep 3 players: Jose Ramirez, Yordan Alvarez, Fernando Tatis.
That's the question, yeah.
That's like 70. I mean, that averages out to like 70 each, right?
Well, it says we are allowed up to 10 keepers, so I don't know if there's other players involved in that $209.
Okay, presumably it is.
Yeah.
Presumably, yeah. Okay, so then it's probably fine. It's probably a good idea.
Yeah, like it depends. If it's just those 3 players, then I would say $210 is probably too much.
Yeah, I agree.
But assuming you have the 7 other players bring you up to 210, then it's probably okay. It just depends on like 210 for your 10 best players. That's probably a little pricey, and you're going to have to find some discounts. But there are going to be discounts available in this draft because those top players are going to be inflated, and that's the thing you always have to keep in mind is there's a finite amount of money in every salary cap draft. It's 3,108, 3,120 for a 12-team roto league.
Yep. 23-man lineup.
Yeah, 23 starting roster spots. And so every dollar above a projection that's used means there's $1 less available. And so what you typically see is when you have, the $55 player, you're going to have some values. And this is what you always see in drafts is there comes a point where it's like, oh man, I wish I had more money left. And so if you go into your draft with 209 of your 270 taken up, you probably just need to sit out the first, handful of players and wait until some of those values come, but they'll be there if you're patient.
And salary cap drafts are so unique to talk about too, specifically when we're answering questions about different type of dynasty or keeper leagues that have inflation involved. For example, if a bunch of people are keeping players way under their value, then that means other players are going to go for way more of their value. Every salary cap draft is different. That's why it's hard to talk about just exact values, salary cap values for players. But it's really, and I know this is going to sound like a cop-out answer, it's a feel thing. You need to feel it within the draft. If everyone is overspending for a certain position or certain type of player, and you want that type of player, then you have to jump in on that inflation within the draft. And so it's just really hard to say like, hey, this player is worth this amount of money, because every salary cap draft is different. It's really kind of tough to nail down. But if you play in one, I think it's probably the best format to play in. So I will throw that out there as well. This next one's from our guy, Jamie Campbell. I know he's a longtime listener, supporter, tweets at us. I think he was in one of the listener leagues last year as well. My longtime 10-team Roto Fantasy League decided to switch from one keeper to up to 3 keepers this season. So basically, each team has the option of drafting or keeping 1, 2, or 3 players in the first 3 rounds of the draft. It's a league that allows daily roster moves, and I've already decided to keep Shohei Ohtani, hitter and pitcher, which he is the number 1 player in that format, and Rafael Devers. But I'm struggling a bit with my third keeper. My options are to keep Michael Harris, Spencer Strider, Justin Verlander, Alek Manoah, or none of them, and take the draft pick. With that in mind, would you keep one of the 4 players that I mentioned? Which one? Or would you take the draft pick in lieu of a third keeper?
I would keep Michael Harris. I have him as a late second rounder I assume this is standard Roto League. It's 10 teams instead of 12. So he probably would be more like an early third rounder in that case. But even still, I don't think you're going to do any better with a third round pick. So Ohtani, Devers, Harris is what I'd do.
And that is a dynamite start to your offense too. I mean, you're covering pretty much every base there. You got third base locked up. You have an outfielder, and obviously Ohtani, who can, you could get both pitching and hitting stats from. And then I think you just, maybe use your 4th or 5th round pick on a starting pitcher. So seems like a pretty good start there, Chris.
Yeah, and then when you're playing in a daily league, like it's almost unfair. It's unfair that you get to keep Ohtani. Like it's one where like he's basically, you're getting 2 players. And probably, gosh, I don't know. Would Ohtani, if he was separate, would he be a top 3 round? The pitcher version of Ohtani might be a 4th round pick, but like it's close enough.
Yeah.
So you're basically getting an extra pick there. It's very helpful. And yeah, in this situation, like it's possible that a better player than Michael Harris might slip through. Maybe someone has 5 players who are worthy of being in the first 3 rounds, but I think that Harris, there's a pretty good chance he's going to be right around the right pick there either way.
This next one's from Cody with a T. Dear Jim, Dwight, and Michael. Never heard of him.
All right, who's Jim?
I'll be Jim. I know, apparently Jim is the bully. Everyone wants to be Jim.
Oh, it's such a concession to have to be Jim. The one the women all swoon over.
The dynamic that I've always said was the person who thinks they're Jim in the office is actually Andy.
Yeah.
Oh, don't say that.
Yeah, it's true.
I don't know. Like, who would you guys be? I mean, Chris already has the glasses, so I guess Dwight makes sense.
Wow.
I mean,
sorry, Chris.
I don't think you want to be any of these people. It's like I know Jim's the cool. Oh, Jim's so cool, but like I don't like Jim. I think Jim's a jerk.
Yeah.
This is a long running position that I've held that people yell at me, but like Jim's a really mean person in that show, and obviously you don't want to be Michael or Dwight. So
Jim has some very sensitive moments, Chris. I think you're painting him.
He's a jerk. He picks on his coworkers. He thinks he's better than them. It's a real thing.
I would say that it's mostly in good fun, though, Chris.
It's not.
All right. Well, Michael,
identity theft is not a crime.
Everybody in the office likes Jim except for Dwight, right?
No, they actually like each other. If you watch the,
well, yeah, they become they forge their relationship.
They start out
over
as an
time,
office, but they become a family.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm just saying, if you knew Jim,
Dwight
in real life,
would be a
you'd
really
like,
difficult person to work with, though. Let's be honest. I'm not saying I'd handle it the same way Jim did, but like, he was kind of a slacker at the start of the series too. Anyway,
The whole point of this, by the way, is when you send in an email or a question, feel free to attach some kind of
I don't want to be any of them, is what I'm saying. All right. That's I remove myself from the office discussion. I don't want to be any of these people.
All right, Chris. Well, if you're not any of these three, that will make you Toby. I'm sorry. I have a decision to make in a categories league, 5x5 with average homers, runs, steals, and OBP. And then on the pitching side, wins, saves, ERA, whip, and strikeouts. We are allowed to keep 3 players, and players have to be kept at a minimum salary of $8. Overall team salary is $300. Some good keepers for value I have include Spencer Strider for $8, Gunnar Henderson for $8, Vaughn Grissom for $8. I almost said Marquise. I don't know why.
I almost did that in my head too.
Dalton Varsho for $11, Carlos Rodon for $22, Tristan McKenzie for $8, Dustin May for $8. For value, for bigger salaries, Vladimir Guerrero Jr. for $67, Max Scherzer for $48, and Yu Darvish for $19. Leaning towards Strider, Rodon, and maybe Varsho or Gunnar Henderson.
And that's exactly what we're talking about with inflation in keeper leagues, especially when you start to push more than $260. Like the extra dollars generally aren't going to be spent evenly. They're going to go to the elite players. That's the way I would look at it, at least.
I think you got to go Strider for $8.
Mm-hmm. I think Varsho for 11.
I think Strider, Varsho, and Rodon.
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, Gunnar Henderson for 8 would be nice too, but I think I think he comes in 4th here.
Yeah.
Does it change if it's a 1 versus 2 catcher league?
Not really. Not at that price. I think Varsho, I mean, in your typical $260 budget league, he's going to be a probably $18 player in most leagues. So I don't think it's a bad value either way.
All right, let's wrap up with this one from Drake. So I've been in a big competitive keeper points league, can keep up to 30 out of 40 players for about 10 seasons now. And I finally won the league last year. Congrats. Our award is the number 1 pick. And I'm debating between, so this is a prospect question, Jackson Holiday, Drew Jones, and Kodai Senga. These are first-year player draft options. I have Senga in here because my team is already great, and I can keep winning now by potentially adding another elite arm. Pitching is key in this format. I attached photos of my team. Sorry, I didn't include those. I also have Jordan Lawler, but could not fit him in the picture based off that team build and age. All right, so this is kind of contextual, but Scott, what are you thinking here? Jackson Holiday, who is the son of Matt Holiday, Drew Jones, who is the son of Andrew Jones, or a potential top 25 starting pitcher in Kodai Senga?
I think you keep one of the kids. Senga's already 30, and well, I can't say with complete certainty he won't be an elite arm because he certainly was in Japan. I don't think he's going to be an elite arm. I mean, I would have put him a lot higher than 64 in my top 100 if I thought he was. He has durability issues. He has control issues. Obviously, the feel for all of his pitches is going to change, going with a ball that's a little bit different, sized a little different, and I think the texture is a little bit different too. And so it's hard to say that he's going to with those red flags that he's going to come in and be an elite pitcher. Which is an elite arm, which is how you were describing him potentially. And then he's 30. So if he's not an elite arm this year, that's not going to change. Like, if anything, he's going to start to regress. So I think you go with Holiday or Drew, who are both very high end. They're both, I think they're 15th and 16th in my top 100. I do have Drew ahead. I think the overall ceiling is higher for him. I keep calling him Drew. It's Drew Jones, obviously. But the fact it's a points league, I mean, Holiday's plate discipline is a big part of his appeal, and I do only have them separated by 1 spot in my rankings. So I might lean Jackson Holiday over Drew Jones in this specific scoring format. But either way, I don't think you can go wrong.
I think I would go Drew Jones as well, but it is close, Scott, as you highlighted back-to-back in your prospect rankings. Chris, I don't know if you have any spicy first-year player draft takes, but Do you have a thought on this question?
No, I mean, if it was a position player coming over from a foreign league, I think I'd be more apt to take the risk. But pitchers hold so many unknowns and so much risk anyway that it's like, generally speaking, I'll take the more sure thing, but he's unproven at this level anyway. So I think you'd probably just lean towards the young guys.
All right. Fair
and
enough.
Holiday feels like more of a sure thing, but that's because he got 20 games in and looked really good. But, you know, I don't
versus
know how
Drew
much.
Jones.
Yeah.
So Jones didn't end up debuting last year because he tore a labrum in his shoulder, which is not insignificant. I mean, the Diamondbacks #1 pick the previous year, Jordan Lawler, the same thing happened to him, and he came back and looked amazing. So when you're that young, I don't worry about it so much, but it is an added risk factor for Drew Jones.
Can the Diamondbacks get their prospects some like shoulder pads or something?
I don't know.
Because Corbin Carroll
man.
also had a
weird.
season-ending shoulder surgery in 2021, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
That's weird.
Sure did. Yeah. Let's go. Come on, get those shoulders on track. You know,
But-
I might be part of the Diamondbacks organization because I have a slightly torn labrum as well. I feel too good, man. I
we
got
probably all do. We all do at some point.
It's rough. I got to get that fixed. Anyway, no one cares about that.
I do want to say, just looking at the mailbag questions that you pulled, like clearly it's keeper season. Clearly those are top of mind for people.
Yep.
In addition to having a dynasty top 150, I have a top 50 keepers based on 2022 cost. So for everyone here who is asking, oh, do I keep a $3 Spencer Strider versus a $22 Carlos Rodon? Those are the situations that top 50 keeper list is meant to address, where you're having to weigh the cost of the player in addition to how good he is. So if you're out there listening and you have keeper questions of your own, be sure to check out that article on cbssports.com.
Do it. cbssports.com/fantasy/baseball. Check out all of the great work from both of these gents, Scott White and Chris Towers. And we're going to wrap there. For those two, I am Frank. Thank you all for listening and watching Fantasy Baseball today. These guys will be back tomorrow. Bye-bye.